been a trucker for close to 15 years, and in all that time I've seen my fair share of strange things. But nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to what happened to me one night in 2020. I was hauling a load overnight through the Mojave Desert in California, heading toward Arizona. The cargo? Appliances, I think. Though that's not the part of the trip that stuck with me. The darkness was absolute, stretching endlessly in every direction. My Semi's headlights were dim, a problem I'd been meaning to fix but hadn't gotten around to. Normally it wasn't a big issue, but out there, with no other cars on the road, it was like driving through ink. I kept having to strain my eyes just to make out the faint outline of the road. I thought about pulling over and waiting for sunrise, but I desperately needed the money, so I kept going, telling myself it was a straight shot. What could go wrong? It was about an hour before dawn when I saw something ahead, rushing toward me in the darkness. I panicked, thinking it was an animal, and slammed on the brakes. My truck screeched to a stop just inches from the obstacle. It was a car, a red Ford Fusion, sitting dead center on the double yellow line, hazard lights flashing. The passenger door was wide open, hanging there like a warning. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't scared yet. I'm a pretty fearless guy. Years on the road and a few bar fights will do that to you. Mostly I was curious. I reversed a bit and pulled over, considering whether to throw down some flares. But since I hadn't seen another car for hours, I figured it wasn't necessary. Stepping out of my truck, I approached the Fusion. The night was warm and eerily still, not even a breeze. The only sound was the faint rhythmic click of the hazard lights. When I reached the car, my unease grew. It was empty, completely empty. I checked the back seat, the floor, nothing. There was no one inside. That's when the fear really kicked in. I kept glancing over my shoulder, suddenly aware of just how dark it was, and how alone I felt. But curiosity kept me there. The key was still in the ignition, though the engine was off. I moved to the trunk, but it wouldn't open. It was jammed. I grabbed the key, unlocked the trunk, but still, nothing. It wouldn't budge. So I opened the back seat and reached through to try the trunk from the inside. This time, it worked. What I found made my skin crawl. 3 large squished black garbage bags, and a thick rope tying the trunk shut from the inside. My gut told me I didn't want to know what was inside those bags. Just as I was reaching toward them, the night exploded. A gunshot, deafening and close. I jerked back, slamming my head against the car's roof. My instincts took over. I tossed the keys onto the front seat and bolted. As I scrambled back to my semi, I heard a voice, rough, angry, and getting closer. Hey, hey! I didn't look back. I dove into my truck and fired up the engine. It stalled. I cursed, slamming my hand on the wheel. And that's when I saw him. A short, stocky man stood by the trunk, illuminated in my headlights. He had red hair, wore overalls and knee-high boots. In one hand he clutched a small shovel, and in the other an old hunting rifle. Our eyes locked. He didn't look crazy. He didn't even look angry. He looked worried. But I didn't care. He dropped the shovel and started waving his hands. "Wait, wait!" he shouted. But there was no way I was waiting. I slammed the truck into gear and tore down the road. I watched in my rearview mirror as he ran after me for a few steps, then turned and sprinted back toward the car. For a few minutes, I thought I was in the clear. My heart was still hammering when I saw the headlights. They were behind me, and they were getting closer. The Fusion was coming up fast, honking like crazy. I called the police, trying to explain the situation through my panic. The car kept tailing me for 15 agonizing minutes. Then it swerved ahead of me and slammed on the brakes. I was seconds away from crashing when I saw salvation. Red and blue lights flashed ahead. A police cruiser. The Fusion veered off the road, speeding into the desert and vanishing into the night. I pulled over and waited for the officer, my hand still shaking on the wheel. I frantically explained everything to the cop, but to my frustration, he seemed more interested in taking my statement than actually chasing down the guy. I told him, twice, that if he left now he could probably catch up, but he just kept assuring me they'd do a thorough search once backup arrived. Then he sent me on my way, promising they'd call if they ever had an update. They never did.
None of my friends have a story this crazy, and I've told it more times than I can count. I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies, but that wouldn't explain the small shovel, or why he followed me. The bags in his trunk were also way too small for something like that. Some of my buddies think dismemberment might have been involved, but for my own sanity, I prefer to believe he was burying something else, maybe putting down a diseased animal or getting rid of dangerous snakes. I'll never really know. And Maui, I do know is that I haven't felt comfortable driving through the desert at night ever since. I'm sure you've seen those trucker videos online, daily routines, tips for long hauls. Being one of the younger guys in this industry, that's all I see on TikTok and YouTube shorts. People always tell me I could have been more than a trucker since I had to drop out of a prestigious university for personal reasons. But honestly, it's not a bad gig. I've been making deliveries for over 2 years now. The long hours are tough, but the real challenge is the isolation. You never really know how that loneliness will mess with your head until you experience it. If you've got demons lurking in your subconscious, trust me, they'll find you on those empty highways. Anyway, this story happened just 3 months after I got my first trucking job. I was still a rookie, driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive. It wouldn't have been so bad except I'd just finished an 8-hour trip right before it. I wanted to get the delivery done as fast as possible, so I decided to drive through the night and reach Lafayette by 3 a.m. Everything was going smoothly, no traffic, clear roads, so I pushed my semi a little faster than usual. Halfway through the drive, I reached for a Red Bull from the console and realized I'd forgotten to restock. I was out. Frustrated, I knew I had to stop somewhere. I hate making stops, they always make me more tired, but falling asleep at the wheel wasn't exactly a better option. The first service stop I saw turned out to be weird. It wasn't a real service station, just an old, abandoned-looking gas station with a repurposed convenience store. I was about to drive on when I saw another quick stop not far up the road, but I figured I'd at least check this one first. I parked and walked over. The place was either going to be open or locked. Simple. But when I pushed the door, it swung open into pitch darkness. I stepped inside, squinting, hoping to spot a drink or a snack left behind. Just as I was about to turn around, my eyes adjusted, and I noticed a faint glow coming from a back room. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept toward the light and found an old refrigerator plugged into the wall. Relieved, I yanked the door open and found nothing. The shelves were gone, the entire appliance gutted. As I shut the door, I heard a distinct clatter from the main room, like something falling to the floor. I froze. Did I imagine that? Slowly, I walked back into the darkened store. Nothing seemed out of place. My nerves were shot, and I decided I wasn't sticking around to find out what was going on. I jogged back to the other quick stop, bought my drink, and hurried to my truck. But as I looked back at the abandoned store, the door was open. I was 100% sure I had closed it behind me. That's when things got worse. Back on the road, the caffeine started kicking in. My mind began replaying the weirdness of that store, but I forced myself to shake it off. Then I noticed something strange, movement in the curtain behind my seat. My heart pounded as I stared at the rearview mirror, watching the fabric shift and ripple. The air was off. There was no draft. Someone was in my truck. I didn't have a weapon. My hands were sweating as I discreetly punched the nearest police. station into my GPS. Those 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I kept imagining a hand reaching out from behind the curtain, yanking the wheel, or worse. When I finally reached the station, I stopped my semi as close as I could and bolted inside. Within seconds, police surrounded my truck. What they found will haunt me forever. They pulled out 3 people, 2 men and a woman, dressed in filthy rags and wrapped in disgusting blankets. One of the men had 2 switchblades. None of them said a word. They just stared at me, cold, menacing. I have no idea what they wanted. I don't think I ever want to know.